Hi, welcome to PROTRADE's Fantasy Mailbag, where every week we answer your questions, and when you don't actually send us questions, we make up the questions and then answer those, because at least we're happy then. So you had a question for me, didn't you, Lucas?
I do have a question for you, Jeff. It comes from My Name is Flapjack, who asks, not that I want to encourage ranting, but I'd love to hear your perspective on last week's Mitchell report. How do you think the media has handled the coverage? And how do you think the Baseball Writers Association of America should handle any of the named players when it comes time for Hall of Fame discussion?
Well, I'll do my best not to rant, so let me just address a couple things that have been interesting, because so much has already been said about this subject, and I'm sure by the time this video is up, people are tired of hearing about it. One, I think it's very interesting how the players named in the report are trying to defend themselves. Roger Clemens flat out denying it, and then people like Fernando Vina trying to address it and trying to contain it into one isolated incident. I don't think it makes any of them look good. I think it makes them look stupid. The questions Bob Lee asked Fernando Vina that Vina was not able to answer and actually seemed like he was lying make me think even more that he's guilty. Now, if you look at the other thing that's very surprising to me is the amount of people that don't think that these players should be in the Hall of Fame because they were named on the Mitchell report. If you think about guys like Roger Clemens, I was on Sirius Radio talking to two professional radio hosts, Mike Yam and Bruce Murray, and these guys are saying Roger Clemens does not deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. That's crazy to me, and that makes me think that people don't understand that the Mitchell report was just one small list of players that were using performance-enhancing drugs. How many people do you think were really doing this during this decade? 40%? 50%? I guarantee it was over 50%. And if that's the case, then let's just call this the steroid era, and let's call a spade, and put Roger Clemens, put Barry Bonds in the Hall of Fame, because they were competing in an era where everybody was doing steroids. So now on to a little lighter note, let's talk about fantasy. We actually got some good fantasy questions this week from Renfei2, who is finally watching our videos, which I'm happy about. I'm in a championship game this week in a PPR league. I need 3 out of these 6 running backs: Frank Gore, Lendell White, Ernest Graham, the evil Adrian Peterson, Maurice Jones-Drew, and Aaron Stecker. Also New England or Seattle defense.
Let's start with the second question first. I know both of those defenses have really good matchups this week, but you have to take New England at home. It's probably going to be bad weather. It's against Miami. Cleo Lemon is not exactly a dangerous quarterback on the other side of the field, so take the Patriots defense, don't worry about it. As far as the running backs go, everybody was talking about Frank Gore being back after the big game last week, but I think that was mostly a product of the Cincinnati defense rather than Gore and the San Francisco offense being better. So I think he's going to get shut down by Tampa Bay this week, and I would stay away from him. I'm going to take Lendell White in a great matchup against the Jets. I'm going to take Ernest Graham in a great matchup against San Francisco. He's been great the whole second half of the season. There's no reason to go away from him now. The evil Adrian Peterson just isn't very good. The matchup's not good. Stay away there. Comes down to Maurice Jones-Drew against Oakland and Aaron Stecker against Philadelphia for the last spot. I think I'm going to take Stecker, who is very involved in the passing game and isn't splitting carries with Fred Taylor, who has been fantastic of late and could make Jones-Drew a tough play. Now, what do you think about those last two, Jeff? I'm a little back and forth on those.
I agree that Gore probably had some success because he was playing Cincinnati and they stink. But the reality is that he is such an integral part of that offense. He was a top 5 pick, preseason, because of talent, because of what he's been able to do in that offense. And I think that team's still playing hard. So I see Gore as a guy that you can't bench in this situation. And I think you start him in front of Aaron Stecker and Maurice Jones-Drew.
I'll tell you what, Jeff. I think Gore is going to finish behind everybody on that list except the evil Adrian Peterson. I'll bet you lunch on it.
All right, well, that's a deal. We'll bet lunch, and the lunch isn't going to be at Subway. The lunch is going to be at a real restaurant.
ProTrade user JRO asks, I need 2 wide receivers and 2 running backs from the following: Greg Jennings, Anthony Gonzalez, Hines Ward, Frank Gore, Willis McGahee, Willie Parker.
I think Jennings is the no-brainer there, and then it comes down to Gonzalez and Hines Ward. I think Indy is not quite the pass-happy offense they used to be, so I'm going to go with Ward, who is the primary target for Ben Roethlisberger. As far as the running backs go, I got to stick with my guns and go with Frank Gore there. If I'm going to be wrong, I'm going to be really wrong. If I'm going to be right, I'll be really right. And then McGahee I'd stay away from because I really don't like that Ravens offense. I don't like having any part of it. So I'm going to go with Willie Parker as the other, so Gore and Parker.
I just want to make a note here that Jeff has picked the Rams to upset the Steelers, and yet has picked both Hines Ward and Willie Parker as fantasy options this week. You think this is going to be a shootout in St. Louis?
Yeah, I think somehow all those things are going to happen. So we're going to see St. Louis win this game 31 to 28. I actually have a fantasy question from my team, Clark County's Finest. We're in the Super Bowl this week, and we need to start 2 of these 4, Brandon Jacobs, Steven Jackson, Ryan Grant, or Edgerrin James. Which one should I start?
You actually asked me the same question last week, and I told you to stay away from Steven Jackson because of his matchup. Now, this week it didn't work out very well. I think next week it's still the right thing to do because the Steelers' run defense is tough. I think you got to take Ryan Grant, who's led the NFL in rushing for the last half of the season, and Brandon Jacobs, who's been very solid of late also.
I also need to start one of these 4 wide receivers, Brian Johnson, Calvin Johnson, Santana Moss, or Lee Evans. Who should I start?
I don't really see how you could start Santana Moss or Brian Johnson here. I think I'm going to take Calvin Johnson, who has been a little shaky and has had some injury trouble this season, but he's a monster of a receiver, and I think he's going to have a big game this week. Switching gears a little bit, we have a fantasy basketball question from Meatwad0. You guys know how much we love fantasy basketball questions. I'm being offered Chris Paul and Tyson Chandler for LeBron James. My current center is Andris Biedrins, and I do have guard issues.
Interesting question, interesting trade. You know, anytime you give up a LeBron James, you need to get a lot back, and you are getting a lot back. You're getting Chris Paul, who's been a top 5 kind of contributor this year at the guard position, and you're getting back Tyson Chandler, who's more than a serviceable center. The problem I have with this trade is that if you're just going to stick Andris Biedrins on the bench, he's been a serviceable center in a big league, certainly has value. So shipping him off to someone to address, you know, the forward issue that you might now have by getting rid of LeBron James makes this a worthwhile trade. If you can't trade Biedrins, this is a trade I don't know if I would do, but trading Biedrins as part of this would definitely make this a trade. Great trade. Final question for you, Lucas, is who's going to win the ProTrade Fantasy Football League?
The ProTrade Fantasy League Championship comes down to ProTrade Ryan and ProTrade Dale. Ryan knocked me out of the semifinals last week with a big performance from the Tampa Bay D. He came into the playoffs as the 6th seed. Dale came in as the 1 seed, hasn't lost since September. I think Dale is going to take it, but it's going to be close. Ryan's going to hang in there. Should be a good matchup.
Well, thanks for that insightful commentary, which I'm sure everyone really cared about regarding the ProTrade Office League. Thanks for joining us this week, and hopefully you made it to the end of this video, and you will join us on Friday. Oh, also one note, this just in, the model likes St. Louis. So for all these who made it to the end of this video, we've got a bonus for you, which is the model liking St. Louis on Thursday night plus 7.5 points. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys on Friday.